What's up, guys? Late at night, a truck driver stops near the forest to relieve himself. At that moment, a van parks nearby and Edit steps out, but she disappears when the driver turns around. On his way back, the man hears a noise and notices Walter trying to escape from the van. Before he can react, Edit crushes his head and knocks him down before feeding on him. When another truck parks nearby and lights up the area, Edit snaps the driver's neck and hides the body inside the van. Walter finally manages to break free from his ropes, but just as he's about to escape, Edit drags him back and injects him with a sedative. The next morning, she boards a luxury cruise, driving her van among the vehicles entering the ship. Then she gets into the elevator, where a little girl notices that her suitcase is shaking. On the way to her room, Edit is seen by Albin, who also notices the suitcase moving. When Edith realizes he's staring, she immediately shuts the door. After that, she opens the suitcase, revealing a tied-up Walter inside. He wakes up and becomes upset when he hears they're heading to Finland. Edit is about to sedate him again, but Walter begs for mercy and promises to behave. She agrees to keep him awake, but gags him before leaving to get some food. As soon as Edit leaves, Walter starts untying the ropes. Meanwhile, the artist Dan is trying to hook up with a fan, but instead of releasing semen, his member starts pouring blood. Embarrassed and furious, he yells at the fan and kicks her out. Security guard Pia hears the screaming and goes to check on the woman, but Dan assures her everything is fine. Afterward, he goes to see Nadia, the woman he has a crush on. He thinks they should perform together and sings part of his new song, making her dancers laugh. Nadia says she likes it, but rejects the idea of them performing together. Dan is forced to swallow his anger. During her performance, he watches from backstage while Pia says it's nice to have a real star on board, which only irritates him more. Then Dan pulls out his phone and accidentally drops a bag of illegal substances. When rookie guard boss picks it up, Dan swears it's not his, but Pia still has to alert the captain in the audience. Meanwhile, Lo tells her cousin Albin that she saw his dad drinking again, even though he's not supposed to because he used to be an addict. However, Albin doesn't want to talk about it. Inside the control room, the crew helps Vince surprise his boyfriend, Cly, with a marriage proposal. Unfortunately, Kylie apologizes and rejects him. Devastated, Vince runs away while wandering through the cruise ship. Edit notices Marianne sitting alone and follows her to the bar. Suddenly, a rude man bumps into her and makes her spill her drink on her shirt. She goes to the bathroom to clean herself up. Edit follows her again, but just as she's about to attack, Goran walks in and helps Marianne remove the stain. They end up leaving together while Edit sighs as she stares at her locket. Meanwhile, Tampa leaves his bachelor party to get some air. When he hears a child's voice asking for help, he follows the sound and finds Walter hiding behind the bed. Tampa immediately grabs his phone to call security, only to hear growling behind him. Suddenly, Walter jumps on him, and they struggle until both crash onto the floor. When Tampa checks if the boy is okay, Walter smiles with terrifying teeth, revealing that he and his mother are vampires. He knocks Tampa down and starts sucking his blood. Once he finishes feeding, Walter watches him slowly die. Then he kicks the body. Suddenly, Tampa wakes up and spits out all his teeth as sharper new ones grow in. He's now a vampire too, but an irrational beast. Walter grabs his hand and tells him he needs to eat. In the hallway, a drunk woman accidentally drops her keycard. Edit picks it up and offers to help her back to her room, something Pia and Boss witness. When they arrive at Edit's room, there's blood everywhere and Walter and Tampa are gone. Edit decides to feed on the woman alone and kills her when she's done. Inside the daycare, a little girl climbs onto the slide, but freezes when she notices the balls in the ball pit moving. Walter suddenly appears nearby and mocks her, but they're interrupted by the cruise mascot. The girl uses the opportunity to run back to her father, while the mascot asks Walter about his dad. Walter says his father is dead just to make the mascot leave, and Tampa emerges from the ball pit. In the corridors, Edith continues searching for Walter. When she reaches the daycare, she notices the scent of vampires in the ball pit and rushes to the reception desk asking for help. The receptionist assures her they can find her child, but she needs his name and room number. Since Edit is on board illegally, she leaves instead. Walter and Tampa keep trying to find someone to feed on, but no opportunity appears, and Tampa is becoming desperate. When they reach the deck, they spot a man taking selfies alone. The guy checks whether the photos turned out well and notices Walter in the background making a terrifying face. Suddenly, Tampa attacks him, knocking him down and feeding on him. Walter has to stop him from taking too much blood and ignores Tampa's growling while forcing him to leave with him. Inside the room, Albin and Lo are watching a movie. They're interrupted by his father Martin, who's drunk again. He believes his family is ashamed of him and maybe he should just give up. Lo ends up arguing with him, and Martin points out that she doesn't even have a father. She storms out after he falls asleep, and Albin follows her into the hallway. Their conversation is interrupted by a strange noise. Lo turns around and discovers the body Tampa left earlier. She takes a photo and uploads it online, thinking it's just a drunk man. After they leave, the man finishes transforming into a vampire. Meanwhile, Callie follows Vince and apologizes for his reaction. He explains that he used to work on this cruise ship, but hated it. That's why he doesn't want to get married there. More importantly, Vince wants children and Cale doesn't. That's why he can't accept the proposal. After Vince walks away, he heads to the bar to drown his sorrows in alcohol. Dan is also drinking and using his substances backstage. Then he prepares himself before going on stage to sing, but not everyone is impressed. He also has to host karaoke night and drinks while the guests sing. Pia approaches him to inform him that the captain wants a urine sample. At the same time, Marianne keeps flirting with Goran and meets his friends, though she finds them pretty rude. They surprise her by apologizing for their behavior. When Magda grabs the microphone, Marianne and Goran dance together, and Dan takes the chance to sneak backstage and continue using drugs. While Tampa and Walter also enter the bar, Dan returns to the stage and notices his nose bleeding. The smell drives Tampa insane. He shoves through the crowd and jumps onto Dan, trying to feed on him. Dan struggles to stop him while the crowd records everything on their phones. When Dan tries to punch him, Tampa bites his hand and starts drinking his blood. In the staff room, Pia explains to Bossy that she hates Dan because he did inappropriate things with teenagers. At that moment, they're called to the bar. When they arrive, C has already pulled Tampa away. Pia and Boss drag him out, but everyone keeps recording and laughing. Dan loses control and starts insulting everybody. Then the bartender pulls him away. At that moment, Edith arrives and spots Walter, who immediately runs off. She follows him to the deck and reminds him that the elders are already hunting them because of what he did. That means they can't keep breaking the rules. Walter refuses to obey and points out that vampirism is already spreading, showing her the teeth on the floor before running away again. Edith chases Walter through the corridors and insists they should work together, but he's tired of the old rules. Then Edith pulls out the sedative. Before she can attack him, Walter screams for help and two guests come to his aid. Edith is forced to flee. On the deck, Goran and Marianne nearly kiss. He wants them to spend the night together, but she panics and leaves alone. After locking Tampa up, Pia and Bossy are called to check on Walter and conclude he must be the missing child the receptionist mentioned. He acts like an innocent kid and tells Pia that his mother has always been cruel to him. When Pia turns around to organize a search with Boss, Walter vanishes. Back at the bar, everyone keeps drinking and partying. They don't notice Walter sneaking around and gently nibbling people's hands little by little, spreading vampirism. Dan mixes his medication with alcohol, but still feels terrible, so he leaves. In the hallway, a crew member shows Dan that his outburst has already been posted online. He's in no mood and keeps walking without realizing Walter is following him. Just as Walter is about to enter Dan's room, the crew's mascot spots him and tries to kick him out. Inside his room, Dan tries taking more drugs, but suddenly starts coughing up blood. When he touches his teeth, they fall out. His body begins trembling as he collapses, slowly transforming into a vampire. At that moment, Walter arrives and makes him drink his own blood. That allows Dan to become an intelligent vampire instead of an irrational beast. Then Walter opens the bathroom door and reveals the injured mascot. Dan instantly jumps on him and feeds. Afterward, Walter tells Dan that he's 143 years old and shows him that their wounds have already healed. Their bodies can recover from almost anything, and they'll never age. All they need is blood. Dan asks if they're vampires, but Walter hates that word because the myths are wrong. Crosses, stakes, and sunlight don't affect them. The elders have rules that must be obeyed, but Walter is tired of that and wants respect. Dan wants the same thing, so they agree to work together. Meanwhile, Tampa's victim is stumbling toward a crowd and Lo spots him. She takes another picture. Before he can attack anyone, Edith finds him and drags him away. In an empty area, she kills him and throws the body into the sea. In the men's bathroom, Edith finds another bitten man hiding in a stall. When she hears people coming, she slips inside and closes the door. The men relieving themselves think they hear noises, but leave without questioning much. Then Edith snaps the victim's neck to stop him from turning. Afterward, she checks the hallways and finds another vampire. She lures him away and kills him in a corner. Back with Lo, she examines her photo and notices Edit standing in it, looking incredibly suspicious. She even calls her a potential serial killer. Albin thinks she's exaggerating and goes searching for his mother, Sarah, who's at the bar with Lo's mother, Layla. Sarah uses a wheelchair and doesn't blame Martin for drinking because she believes it's hard for him to take care of her and their son. Layla insists she should leave Martin, but Sarah wants Albin to have someone who can support him. She explains that life would be easier if Albin didn't exist, and unfortunately he overhears that last part without context. The awkward moment is interrupted when Lo arrives too, and Albin uses the opportunity to ignore his mother. Lo shows them the photo of Edit, and Albin points out her strange teeth. Sarah concludes she's probably a drug addict. When he tells them about the moving suitcase, nobody believes him. Lo then asks Layla if Albin can stay with them tonight because Martin is acting badly, and Layla agrees. Sarah apologizes to him before he leaves. C continues searching everywhere for Vince without success. On the deck, Vince runs into Marianne and they end up talking about their terrible luck in love. They head to the bar together and Vince convinces Marianne that she should leave Goran behind and enjoy life. When Goran arrives, Vince leaves them alone. Goran apologizes for moving too fast, and Marianne is ready to give him another chance. In the bathroom, Vince receives a call from Callie, but ignores it. Frustrated, Callie goes to their room and is devastated when he discovers the surprise Vince had prepared for him. Meanwhile, Lo and Albin watch Dan's video and notice Edit staring at him in the background. Suspicious, Albin takes Lo to the room where he saw Edit earlier. They knock on the door, but nobody answers. At that moment, Martin wakes up and searches for his son. The kids run through the hallway when Mad hears a scream. She rushes to the reception desk to report what happened. Boss and Pia are sent to investigate. They split up and start knocking on doors, only to find drunk passengers everywhere. Suddenly, Pia hears Bossy calling for help over the radio. She rushes into the other corridor and finds a bloody handprint on the doorframe. Boss no longer answers the radio, so Pia enters the room. Growling echoes through the darkness and she fights something she can't see. After struggling for a while, she breaks free and grabs the fire axe to kill her attacker. As she leaves, Edith notices the blood and rushes into the room to check which vampire was killed. In her own room, Mad hears knocking and opens the door for her best friend, who walks in with a blank stare. Then Mad notices the horrific wound on her back and assumes she was attacked. Suddenly, the woman rips out Mad's earring. Mad quickly flees. Outside, Lo and Albin search for the body they saw earlier and find bloody teeth nearby. Not far away, Dan tampers with the ship's antenna, cutting off all communications. In the control room, the crew realizes they've lost contact with the mainland. Walter and Dan walk in, but the captain ignores them because he's trying to restore communications. Dan grabs the captain's hat, places it on Walter's head, and then bites the captain. At the bar, someone screams for help, and the crowd watches as a woman drags her bleeding friend into the middle of the room. The staff rush to close the doors just before a horde of vampires starts pounding on them. Guests try using their phones, but none of the devices work. In the security office, Pia cleans the blood off herself before trying the radio and the phone without success. When the head of security, Anti, walks in, Pia tells him Boss is dead and that she killed a passenger in self-defense. She also explains that the passenger bit Bossy to death, but Anti doesn't believe the story. Pia points to Tampa on the security cameras, saying he must also be a monster and they need to lock the place down. However, Auntie thinks it's all a prank. On another camera, Pia is shocked to see Boss walking out of the room. Edit quickly finds him and shoves him back inside. Auntie sees it too and tries calling the captain, but nobody answers. He decides to investigate himself and tells Pia to stay with the cameras. She watches other guards patrolling the hallways and tries warning them through the radio, but it's already too late. The vampires outside the bar spot the guards and immediately attack them. After suffering a brief breakdown, Pia manages to contact the receptionist and tells her that every area is now locked down. She orders her to keep people away from the bar doors. The receptionist uses the announcement system to tell all guests to remain inside their rooms. Lo and Albin try explaining that the crazy people are vampires, but Callie tells them to go back to their parents. Inside the bar, the wounded woman dies and her friend desperately tries reviving her. However, she wakes up as a vampire and attacks her instead. Goran and another man pull her away and look for something to tie her up with. Pia begins patrolling the corridors and sends confused passengers back to their rooms. She runs into Dan, who pretends to act normal. Pia notices the bite mark on his hand has disappeared, but she walks away after hearing screams behind him. Walter is feeding on the receptionist. Once he finishes, he guides Dan through the ship and teaches him how to control the irrational vampires, making them follow them. In another hallway, Lo and Albin are horrified when they discover 4 vampires feeding on 2 corpses. Lo starts filming, but the vampires hear them, forcing the children to run. A chase begins as more and more vampires appear across the ship. The kids run into Martin and tell him to flee too. He only believes them when he sees a blood-covered vampire chasing after them. No matter which hallway they take, they keep running into vampires. Eventually, they head toward the spa. The attendant is locking the door, but opens it long enough to let the family inside before shutting it again, right before the vampires can follow. Meanwhile, Sarah is searching for her family while also encountering vampires throughout the corridors. She drives her wheelchair as fast as possible until she reaches her room, only to realize her family isn't there. When another vampire appears in front of her, she starts backing away in her wheelchair, trying to escape. Dan and Walter continue wandering through the ship, while leading the entire vampire horde behind them. Back at the bar, the bartender notices the sudden silence and looks outside to confirm the creatures are gone. Marianne and the others wonder if they should leave, but they're interrupted when the bitten woman transforms into a vampire as well. She attacks the crowd, causing everyone to panic and flee from the bar. As soon as everyone escapes, the bartender stays behind to lock the door before the vampire attacks him too. Goran and Marianne also escape, avoiding every corridor where they hear noises. Marianne realizes she still has Vince's keycard and says they should go to his room to help him. On their way there, they notice a little girl crying in the corner. Marianne tries helping her, but the child is also a vampire. The couple runs away and manages to hide inside Vince's room. At the spa, a vampire smashes against the door until the lock breaks. But once it enters, it doesn't see anyone because the cousins are hiding inside the jacuzzi. At that moment, a landline phone rings, and the vampire rushes toward the desk, where it finds the attendant and begins devouring her. Lo and Albin use the opportunity to sneak out of the spa unnoticed. Inside the staff room, the entire crew gathers to discuss the situation. After waiting for a while, Pia realizes the captain isn't coming, so she decides to lead the meeting herself. She explains that something contagious is making people violent, not noticing Edit sneaking into the room. When Auntie finally arrives, he confirms nobody in the control room is answering. He has no idea what to do, forcing Pia to take charge again. She announces that she and Auntie are going to force their way into the control room to disable the autopilot, otherwise the ship will keep moving until it crashes into port. Once the ship stops, they'll be able to lower the lifeboats. Pia also says that anyone willing to volunteer can go back outside to help stranded passengers, but she won't force anybody to do it. Unfortunately, the meeting is interrupted when the vampire horde storms into the room. Auntie tries fighting them with his knife, but one vampire walks straight into the blade without caring. Walter gives an order and the creatures go insane, attacking every crew member who isn't fast enough to escape. Chaos erupts across the room. Pia fights off a vampire, but Dan stops it because she belongs to him. Pia isn't strong enough to stop him when Dan slams her down and starts drinking her blood. Suddenly, Edit begins smashing him with a fire extinguisher, forcing him out of the room while yelling at him to stay away from her son. She blames him for filling Walter's head with ideas, but Dan explains that Walter planned everything and that Edit herself pushed him toward this. She keeps beating him until she hears the door. Dan takes advantage of the distraction to knock her down. Just as he's about to kill her, Walter stops him and tells him to leave. Then Edit and Walter argue about the rules and how vampires are supposed to behave. Walter is furious because his mother condemned him to this life, and he tells her he hates her before running away. On the deck, people are grabbing life jackets and trying to board the lifeboats. Albin arrives with his cousin, but refuses to leave because he wants to find his mother. Goran sees everything through the window, so he and Marianne decide to try boarding the boats too. After they leave, Vince finally reaches his room but can't get inside. After the vampires leave the staff room, the survivors help Pia back onto her feet. She's feeling sick, so she asks Callie to go with Auntie to the control room. Before they leave, she gives Callie the engagement ring she had been protecting. As soon as they walk away, Pia realizes the smell of blood is calling to her. She grabs a pair of handcuffs and chains herself to a railing while feeling the transformation beginning. As the men climb the stairs, Auntie starts feeling dizzy. Even so, they continue moving until they reach the control room, only to discover everything inside has been destroyed. Suddenly, the captain slams against the window, revealing he's also become a vampire. Obviously, they can't enter that room anymore, so they realize they need to stop the engine instead. However, It's located on the lowest deck, and reaching it would almost be impossible to survive. At that moment, Callie and Anti notice the crowd lowering a lifeboat and run to stop them, but they're too late. Because of the ship's speed, the boat sinks into the ocean the moment it touches the water. Only a few survivors remain behind, including Lo, Albin, and some elderly people. They ask Callie and Anti for help, and the two men agree to stay together while searching for another solution. In the corridors, Edith moves from vampire to vampire, killing them by snapping their necks. Soon she finds Pia, who has also become an irrational vampire. Knowing she'll need Pia's help to end all of this, Edith gives her some of her own blood. As Pia goes through her new transformation, Edith shows her the picture of Walter inside her locket. She explains that he died from tuberculosis, so she took his body to the elders and convinced them to save her son. Since then, they've traveled around the world avoiding attention, but Walter has become more rebellious over the years. Edith says they need to work together to stop the Horde and breaks Pia's hand to free her from the handcuffs, since it will heal quickly anyway. Then Edith takes Pia to the reception area and tells her to feed. Pia stares at a young woman for a moment, but lets her go, refusing to hurt innocent people. Edith realizes Pia is struggling and explains they won't be able to help anyone if she doesn't feed. Seeing no other option, Pia attacks another woman and drinks her blood. Once she's fully fed, Edith teaches Pia to snap the victim's neck so they won't return as vampires. Pia feels guilty for killing someone, but Edith reminds her they're monsters now, and if they don't contain this outbreak, it will spread to the mainland. After killing 2 more vampires, Edith finally convinces Pia to work with her. They walk through the corridors, killing every vampire they encounter while searching for Dan. Pia points out that this method is taking too long, so they need a different plan. On stage, Dan searches for Nadia and finds her crying behind the equipment. He comforts her and says she's special, sounding terrifying as he explains that he needs someone to share eternal life with. When he confesses his love, Nadia answers that she'd rather meet death than be with him. She tries to escape, but Dan grabs her and snaps her neck. Afterward, he picks up the microphone and starts singing. When Walter finds him, Dan explodes in anger, calling him pathetic for failing to kill his own mother. He warns Walter that vampires only need one leader and takes back the captain's hat before Walter flees in fear. In the kitchen, Albin's group searches for knives and anything else they can use as weapons. Goran uses the opportunity to confess to Marianne that he spent time in prison, and that's where he met his friends. Lo shows everyone the picture of Edith, and Albin explains that she started all of this. While they discuss ideas, Auntie secretly hides a wound on his hand. Callie notices a landline phone and tries calling his room, but obviously nobody answers. In another corridor, Vince feels helpless as he hears the phone ringing. Then Albin calls his own room and is shocked when his mother answers. He promises he'll rescue her, but Sarah tells him to leave without her. When Martin grabs the phone, she hangs up immediately. The group then notices Auntie has disappeared and finds him in the next room. He finally reveals his wound and tells them to leave without him, handing Callie the master keycard. After everyone leaves, Auntie realizes he's beginning to transform into a monster, so he walks onto the deck and jumps into the ocean to give up. When the group reaches the elevator, a vampire tries following them, but they move quickly and the doors close before the creature can attack. Seconds later, they arrive in the engine room, and the men argue about how to stop the ship. Albin interrupts them by pointing at the emergency stop button. The moment they press it, the ship finally stops moving and the lights go out. When Edith notices the blackout, Pia tells her help should arrive in about an hour. Edith realizes Pia was right about needing a better plan and decides they should burn the ship down. At first, Pia refuses to sacrifice the survivors, but Edith reminds her that if they fail to stop this, vampirism will spread across the mainland and eventually reach Pia's own children too. After Pia reluctantly agrees, Edith explains that they need to lure all the vampires into the garage and blow up the cars. Pia convinces her to split up to cover more ground. Meanwhile, Albin's group keeps moving, and another vampire chases them. Martin uses Lo as a shield, but Marianne quickly kills the creature with a knife. Afterward, everyone condemns Martin, who claims he only did it to protect his son. However, Albin finally explodes at him too, and declares he's going to save his mother. Martin storms off alone to search for the remaining lifeboats. Once everyone else turns away, Albin secretly leaves by himself as well. Lo immediately goes after him. Soon, Pia reaches the reception desk and uses the announcement system to tell the survivors to head toward the lifeboats. Dan interrupts her after realizing she's become an intelligent vampire. Pia tells him about Edith's plan and tries convincing him to work with them to stop her. Instead, Dan locks Pia inside a cell and says he hopes the crew burns alive. After promising he'll escape on a lifeboat himself, he shuts down the ship's fire sprinkler system. On the lower deck, Edith realizes Pia only pretended to agree with her. When she finds a survivor asking for help, she sedates him and cuts his body before dragging it across the ship. The smell of blood causes more vampires to follow her. In another corridor, Vince hears noises and follows them until he discovers Maya hiding behind a cart. After hearing Pia's announcement, they decide to head for the lifeboats together. They manage to hide inside an elevator moments before Edith walks past, followed by the vampire horde. Lo and Albin reunite shortly before spotting all the vampires marching together. Walter also appears when he hears the noise and stares at the children, but ignores them and follows the horde instead. When Lo and Albin finally reach the family room, they discover Sarah dead on the floor. Albin completely breaks down and Lo can't snap him out of it. At the same time, Goran and Marianne separate from the others to search for Goran's friends, but all the rooms are empty. Believing they won't survive, they confess their feelings to each other and end up making love. Inside the garage, Edith finally drops the body and lets the vampires feed on it. Then she grabs a gasoline canister from her van and starts pouring fuel everywhere. She even splashes some inside the van where she turns on the stove. While searching for her lighter, she finds an old photo album and becomes emotional over the memories. Walter walks in and apologizes, saying everything is his fault. Edith hugs him and says it's okay, but also admits she can't keep doing this anymore. After telling him she loves him, she lights a flame and throws it into the gasoline. The resulting explosion kills every vampire inside the garage and shakes the entire ship. Flames quickly spread through the corridors and eventually reach Dan, who shields himself with his guitar. When the fire alarm begins blaring, Lo convinces Albin to move again, only for them to discover the door blocked by Martin, who is also turned into a vampire. Lo pushes him back and the cousins slam the door shut together, but Martin is strong enough to force it open again. He knocks Albin down and prepares to bite him. Then Lo jumps onto Martin, trying to stop him. Martin easily throws her aside and attacks Albin once more. At that moment, Sarah wakes up as a vampire and smashes Martin with a bottle, knocking him down. Lo drags Albin out of the room so Sarah can kill her husband without guilt. At the reception area, Callie uses the announcement system to tell the survivors to head for the lifeboats because the ship is on fire. He also tells Vince to forget about everything. Hearing this, Vince and Mad rush through the corridors. While they run, Mad accidentally cuts her foot. All the survivors hiding in their rooms start pouring out, and panic spreads across the ship. Goran and Marianne also run, avoiding flames and creatures along the way. Unfortunately, a vampire gets close enough, and Goran sacrifices himself so Marianne can escape. As smoke begins filling every corner of the ship, Callie hears Pia's voice. He finds a radio beside a corpse, and she explains that she's trapped. Callie rushes toward the cells to help her. However, he freezes when he notices the bite mark on her neck. Pia explains they need to kill every vampire, and that she's the only one capable of doing it now. Eventually, Callie agrees to free her. Afterward, they run toward the security cameras to create an evacuation plan. Callie gets distracted after seeing piles of corpses on the screens, but Pia reminds him to stay focused. Meanwhile, a vampire approaches Maid and Vince, who are pretending to be dead among the bodies. Because the smells are mixed together, the vampire leaves without attacking. Suddenly, one of the corpses wakes up as a vampire. Em and Vince carefully try moving away. Unfortunately, she steps on a noisy toy, causing the earlier vampire to return. Luckily, Pia arrives just in time and kills it. She tells the pair to run before quickly killing the second creature as well. As the flames spread into the upper decks, Pia keeps running from room to room, helping survivors evacuate. Outside, Callie guides everyone toward the lifeboats. When Lo and Albin arrive, they're relieved to reunite with Layla, who also survived. She thanks Callie for helping them before they all board the boat together. Callie should leave too, but he hesitates. His hope is rewarded when Vince appears behind him, and they reunite with a kiss. While Marianne searches for life jackets, Med notices someone hiding under a blanket. She pulls it away and discovers Dan underneath. When he tries claiming he isn't a vampire, Pia appears to stop him. Dan grabs Med while Pia pretends she no longer cares about humans. Dan believes the lie and releases Mad before fleeing. Kylie finishes helping the last survivors into the lifeboats, while Pia continues searching for Dan. At the reception area, Dan attacks her, and a brutal fight begins. They exchange several blows, and Pia stabs him in the stomach with a knife, but it barely hurts him and the battle continues. Both vampires are incredibly strong, yet Dan gains the upper hand and traps Pia in a chokehold. Just as he's about to kill her, Kay arrives and throws her a weapon, which she uses to knock Dan down. Then Pia grabs his neck and snaps it, finally killing him for good. Afterward, Callie and Pia run back to the deck where the lifeboat is still waiting. However, Pia knows what she has become and tells Callie to leave without her. He refuses to abandon her, and after a long argument, she finally steps into the boat too. The last survivors sail away, and everyone cries in relief while the ship slowly collapses beneath the flames. At sunrise, helicopters finally appear in the sky to rescue the survivors. Meanwhile, on a nearby island, a person is walking their dog when they discover the vampire girl lying on the beach, bringing the first season of Blood Cruise, the 2025 horror and drama series, to an end. That was full movie recaps. See you in the next video.